Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kia ora, brothers. It's the Director. Chargers fans, you guys ready for some more off-season content? Yeah! But we're going to be doing it right, okay? We're going to be talking about what comes first in the off-season for the Chargers, combine and free agency. The very first thing the Chargers should be focusing on is in-house. And in today's video, we're going to go over the Chargers scenario of keep, trade, cut. What are some of the Chargers in-house players that the Chargers need to re-sign and maintain on the roster, and who are some guys that maybe we should consider letting walk, maybe consider cutting, maybe even consider trading in the 2022 offseason? Because there's a flurry of moves the Chargers can make this offseason with like $70 to $80 million after cuts this year. It's a big opportunity for the Chargers to make a splash, and one that I do fully expect them to make this year. But again, there are a number of guys we got to take care of first that will affect that number from in-house signings. These are some big decisions, man. We're building Staley's dream team, that defense that he needed, that he wanted to create, that he was so famous for in Los Angeles with the Rams. He wants to recreate with the Chargers. So some of these decisions and opinions I'm about to share might be considered controversial, but that's okay. Not everybody has to agree with everything. Just let me know your guys' opinions in the comments section below as we're making our way through this list. Now, before we do get started, guys, question in the comments like always. Who would be the most surprising cut in 2022 for the Chargers that you can think of? It doesn't even have to be any of the guys here on this list. Somebody the Chargers could part ways with that would shock the world. Now, with that, guys, let's get into this one. Before we do, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers off-season content. Yeah! The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action. The 2022 Chargers off-season program: keep, trade, or cut. Now, there's a number that I want you guys to pay attention to. Keep that in the back of your minds as we're going through this list of potential cut candidates, signings, stuff like that. The current cap in the NFL, where the Chargers rank right now, $58 million is what I'm seeing. I'm not sure if that accounts for the rollover cap of $9 million for the Chargers, but we're going to say $58 million is where we are starting, which is the second in the NFL as of right now. Now, how can we help that number? Well, our first guy definitely could help out. Let's actually put him right here. Not the first guy. The first guy definitely could help the captain, Bryan Bulaga. This was an exciting free agent acquisition in 2022, guys. I was really stoked. The Chargers needed help at right tackle. We were super desperate. And Bryan Bulaga, his career in Green Bay was super solid. We got another guy out of Green Bay recently in Corey Linsley, who's absolutely played out well with the Bolts. But Bryan Bulaga, he's really struggled with injury over his time with the Chargers. Unfortunately, I think he's a solid player, but he missed the entire 2021 season this year, forcing the Chargers to really shift gears as to who's protecting Justin Herbert. I don't like that. I want somebody solid protecting our franchise quarterback, and the Chargers did not have that for him this year. Last season as well, in Justin Herbert's rookie campaign, Bryan Bulaga missed 6 games as well due to injury. So in the last 2 seasons, Bryan Bulaga has played 10 total games with the Chargers. One of those seasons featuring 17 weeks. So that's a big yikes when it comes to this signing. Of course, hindsight, this was great, but after the fact, man, oh my goodness, missing that much time. 3 years, I think $30 million is what the Chargers signed him for. He's currently under contract for 1 more season this year in 2022. What do we do with him? Well, the judge director, is that what we're going to go with? What is the verdict here? My verdict with Bryan Bulaga at right tackle is to cut him, unfortunately. Again, that's going to help that cap number a lot. Bulaga, in my opinion, again, solid player, but unfortunately, he's just not available to the team. He's not reliable in his health. It's really hindered him in his time with the Bolts, and I do think it's time for them to part ways because I don't want a maybe right tackle. I want a right tackle. They might not be as good, whoever the Chargers decide to pick up at the position. They might not be as good as Bryan Bulaga, but they need to be available. They need to be on the line. They need to be available on game day, and I just don't think that's something Bryan Bulaga can provide. This would generate $11 million for the cap for the Chargers in 2021 and make room to sign a right tackle that will be less injury prone. This would put the Chargers around $70 million in cap space for the 2022 offseason. Very exciting stuff. Now let's talk about the guy who we flashed just a moment ago on the screen, and Kyzir White, middle linebacker. This is a big decision for the Chargers. Do we keep, trade, or cut Kyzir White? And of course, we can't trade him. He was on a contract season this year. Kyzir White, stellar season, right? Stellar season with the Bolts in 2021. He led the team in tackles with 90. He had it on top of that like a sack and 2 interceptions. He's been fantastic in coverage. The dude is tall. I think somewhere around 6'2". He's very fast, and I think it's pretty evident to what he contributes to the team. He played safety in college in his time out there, and that really helped him develop his coverage skills before transferring over to the linebacker position. I think this is a big reason why he's been so effective in Brandon Staley's scheme, in my opinion. You know, coverage is pivotal at the middle linebacker spot for Brandon Staley. And additionally, as evident by his stats, Kyzir White is an excellent tackler at the position too. He can contribute versus the run, and that's something that the Chargers really, again, need to covet in that particular defensive scheme. Per Bolt beat, an extension would likely cost the Chargers around $25 million over 3 years. Again, that's what, $8.3 million a season. I don't think that's too bad. So what's my verdict? What's my verdict, Mr. Director? I think, honestly, we got to keep this guy. I think this should be at the top of the list of Chargers moves this offseason to get done right away, is extend Kyzir White to a 3-year, $25 million contract. He's just too valuable to Brandon Staley's scheme, and he proved it in 2021 this season. Probably the most important player we have to re-sign this offseason is Kyzir White, because, again, who are you going to bring in to replace him? There's very few players in the NFL that can do what he does, and he definitely proved he's one of the best this season. So definitely make sure that we re-sign Kyzir White very soon. Now, speaking of the middle linebacker position, let's talk about our old friend K9 Kenneth Murray. Is it just K9 now? No. Is it just Kenneth Murray now? Are we dropping K9 after this season? I don't know, man. Murray was traded up for in the 2020 draft. And again, in hindsight, a lot of us were super excited. This looked like a fantastic move by the Chargers. He had a great rookie season, leading the team in tackles in his rookie year. He looked really good, and I was super excited to see him come back in 2021 and have an even better year. However, a big thing changed in 2021. The Chargers changing defensive coordinators, more specifically from Gus Bradley, the DC, to Brandon Staley, the head coach. And I don't know, man. Even in his rookie season, Kenneth Murray struggled mightily in coverage in his time with the Chargers. And this leaked into his sophomore season big time, where Staley's scheme, he was asked to do a lot more in pass coverage, and he simply just could not keep up, unfortunately, for Kenneth Murray. Some of the biggest plays the Chargers or against the Chargers this season were due to K9's lack of coverage skills, is what we're gonna say. However, if we are in the line of keeping Kenneth Murray, he is a physical specimen. He's tall, he's fast, he's a great tackler. His rookie deal makes him a cheap roster spot for the next 2 years, and who knows? The Chargers have been experimenting with him at edge. Maybe he can develop a little bit better in coverage. Maybe the Chargers find, a better way to utilize them or utilize him in their scheme. Who knows? But what's my verdict? What's my verdict for Kenneth Murray? Let me know what your guys' verdict is as well. My verdict for K9, we keep him, but he could be traded. Okay, me personally, I would be disappointed if we gave up on him so soon, with him on his rookie contract still for the next 2 years. But in my eyes, at worst, he's a quality backup, right? However, I do understand if a second or third round pick is enough incentive for the team to decide to move on. If somebody comes out and says, hey, you know what, Kenneth Murray, we see the potential of him in our particular scheme, and we would like to offer a second or third round pick for your former first round pick, I think I would understand if they decide to move on for that kind of incentive. Would it be that high of a pick? I don't know, but I would understand it, okay? Because there are schemes out there in the NFL that fit Kenneth Murray better than the Los Angeles Chargers, plain and simple. Just like Denzel Perriman, maybe not the best guy in coverage for the Chargers, but man, did he have a huge impact on the Vegas Raiders this last season. Kenneth Murray is definitely in that conversation. So don't give up on the thought of keeping Kenneth Murray on the roster, but don't be surprised if there's a team out there willing to give up a second, third, or even fourth round pick for Kenneth Murray that the Chargers decide to bite on, okay? This would save the Chargers $1.8 million for the cap, and not a big number, but it's something we got to count. Next up, big name this season for the Chargers, somebody that we were really hoping to see develop, well into Brandon Staley's scheme, is Jerry Tillery, the defensive end, the interior defensive lineman. Now, Tillery has been an up-and-down player for the Bolts since 2019 when he was drafted. He's shown flashes of generating pressure from the interior, but I think these flashes have been far and few between, right? Chargers fans, I get it, dude. We've been frustrated. He was supposed to be the answer, to help Joey Bosa out, stop the double and triple teams, and unfortunately, Jerry Tillery just has not lived up to where he was drafted in the first round. Late in the first round, mind you, but still, he just has not lived up to that hype, unfortunately, for the Chargers. Now, Tillery, again, drafted in 2019. He's still on his rookie deal. 2022 would be his last season, okay? So keeping that in mind, what is my verdict in keep, trade, or cut? Jerry Tillery, I'm going to say trade him, okay? I say trade Jerry Tillery. I know it seems foolish to let go of a player on the last year of the rookie deal. Very similar to the situation with Kenneth Murray. I would rather keep him, but the reason I'm a little different on Jerry Tillery is that I feel that he's been more of a hindrance than anything on this team, and let me explain that. I think we saw too much playing time for Jerry Tillery this year due to his draft pick status. Does that make sense? Because Jerry Tillery was a first-round pick, he's going to be in the lineup a lot. And I think we saw a little bit of that with Kenneth Murray as well. The issue with Jerry Tillery is I saw other players available that were making a bigger impact for the team, especially versus the run that the Chargers decided to forego in order to make sure that, Jerry Tillery had enough snaps, and ultimately, I just didn't like that decision, okay? In my opinion, when you really take a step back and look at it, he doesn't really fit this scheme anymore. I think it might be time to move on, and I think a trade makes the most sense for the Chargers. He'd likely fetch maybe a day 3 pick, a low day 3 pick, maybe a high day 2 pick if we're lucky. A high day 3 pick, low day 2 pick if we're lucky. But if the Chargers just can't move him, if there's nobody that wants to go out there and trade for Jerry Tillery, which he does have something to offer, I'm not going to say he doesn't. He just doesn't fit the scheme so well. But if the Chargers can't find a trade partner, I would say, honestly, I'm on board with cutting him. Isn't that crazy? I'm on board with it. I know it would be complicated because, at worst, he's a good backup, right? At worst, keep him because he could be a good backup. But unless we have somebody in there that's the true number one, not named Jerry Tillery, I think it's too much temptation. I think it's too much temptation that the Chargers be like, oh, let's get Jerry back in there, and forego maybe, signing another guy that could help the Chargers in the run D. I think it's just too much of a temptation. It's just in my opinion, okay? This move would save the Chargers $2 million. This is probably one of the more controversial ones. Why cut a guy in the last year of his contract? I just don't want there to be a temptation of them running out there with him when we've already had enough sample size to say that he's probably more of a hindrance than a help to the team at this point. Next up, I wasn't sure if I was going to include this name, but I have heard people talking about it, so I'm going to go ahead and clear it up really, really quick. Chris Harris Jr., the cornerback, okay? Chris Harris Jr. is a free agent this year with the Bolts. That's why I wasn't going to include him on this list. But there is a possibility, be it small, that the Chargers decide to re-sign him. Signed in 2020 from free agency, he was supposed to be the short-term answer to our slot cornerback position. I was super excited about it. I think I was more excited about other guys, but I saw the potential in Chris Harris Jr. joining the Bolts. However, He was injured for the most of the 2020 season and fell short of expectations in 2021, plain and simple. He's 32 years old. He hasn't been able to keep up with the faster wide receivers in the AFC West, which, again, there's no shortage of. And he really just does seem like he's fallen off when it comes to coverage a little bit. His best years might be behind him. Still one of the best free agent players, undrafted free agent players to ever play in the NFL. But as of right now, I think it's maybe time for the Chargers to move on, not consider. So my verdict, if it wasn't obvious enough, I say let him walk. The Chargers need a big cornerback signing this offseason to finally complete this group. And unfortunately for me and Chris Harris Jr., I just don't think he fits the bill anymore. Next up, let's talk a little special teams, right? Dustin Hopkins coming into the mix mid-season. He was definitely an answer to a lot of Chargers fans' prayers, am I not? Because the Vizcaino experiment definitely crashed and burned, maybe resulting in our special teams coach or coordinator getting fired this offseason. I think that actually had a lot to do with it. Now, a solid midseason pickup was Dustin Hopkins, right? Formerly of Washington. He was fantastic for the Chargers, hitting 88% of his field goals, 91% of his extra points. He was a big upgrade over Vizcaino, who was constantly missing kicks and extra points. Even Kessman, who had a couple of opportunities, I think, in the early portion of the preseason. In my opinion, very short one, verdict here for me is extend him. He's a free agent this season. Get him a new contract, okay? Short and simple. I'd rather not gamble with a new name in 2022 because sure, we could maybe grab somebody that's better and hits above 88% in field goals and above 91% in extra points. But in the world of kickers, that is never a guarantee, right? Dustin Hopkins is good, not great, but that's still better than most kickers in the NFL. So in my opinion, a 2-year, $4 million contract should keep him in Los Angeles. And that's something that I would just kind of, get done right away, not sweat the kicker position next season. Dustin Hopkins is solid in my opinion. Next up, speaking of special teams, Andre Roberts, the kick returner. Again, this is not the biggest signing, so I'll keep it short and simple. Roberts was signed around the same time as Dustin Hopkins, right? And Roberts has been perhaps the best returner that we've seen in years. He produced the first return or kick return for a touchdown that we've seen since Desmond King in, I think, 2018. He's been really solid. He's been really solid for the Chargers. And again, we haven't seen quite the production at the kick returner position in a long time. However, the biggest knock on Andre Roberts is his age. Okay, he is older, 34 years old, as a matter of fact. And in terms of the NFL, that's like retirement age, especially for a wide receiver. Okay, so he's even considering it himself. My verdict for Andre Roberts, though, when it comes to extending him, because again, we signed him to just the 2021 season. He's a free agent right now. What do we do with him? My verdict is we keep Andre Roberts, okay? Because when I think, when it comes to Andre Roberts' role with the Chargers, I think age is just a number, right? All he's doing for this team is returning kicks. He's not out there running screens. He's not out there running slants or go routes. He's just out there to help us out in special teams. Every once in a while, we'll sprinkle him into the offense, but not very often unless injury is a big thing, right? He's been fantastic, and I want to keep what worked in the special teams group intact going into 2022. So for me, looking it up, I think it's a 2-year, $4.5 million contract for Andre Roberts. That should keep him around again, and that's on the cheap with the Chargers' large cap to work with this season. Next up, a big name that I don't think has been getting talked enough about this offseason is Linval Joseph, okay? He was signed, I think, the same year as Chris Harris Jr. Via free agency, because he ended up being my favorite pickup that year. A lot of people were like, oh, Chris Harris Jr., Bryan Bulaga, Linval Joseph. Who do you think makes the biggest impact? I said every single time Linval Joseph because of what he's done in his previous teams. I think the Minnesota Vikings and New York Giants. He's been really good. He's been the cornerstone of this defensive line for the past couple of years. And, honestly, I think he became even more valuable in Brandon Staley's 3-4 scheme as a nose tackle. Linval does what many nose tackles just can't do in the NFL. And I'm going to say, early in the season, he was soaking up blocks, stopping the run, adding pressure to the quarterback. He looked really, really good. But I also have to point out that maybe he declined a little bit in the second half of the season, which is why, he's a candidate for the Chargers not to extend. He's a free agent. He might not get extended. Okay, and another thing kind of working against him, probably the biggest one at this point, is his age. At 33 years old, an extension, if we were to resign him, would probably be for like a year or two, okay? So what's my verdict for Linval Joseph? I'm going to say we let him walk, okay? And that's tough because I really like Linval Joseph a lot. He was my favorite signing of 2020. But again, his age, he's going to be tough to replace. But bottom line, I think his age is a big factor. And this team really needs a drastic change at the defensive line in order to improve on their bottom of the league run defense, okay? That's just plain and simple. Brandon Staley came out and said, defensive line, those trenches, that's going to be, the focal point of this offseason. I don't know if Linval Joseph would fit the margins due to his age, right? And I think a young prospect like Jordan Davis, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction for the Chargers. So plain and simple, out with the old, in with the new. This team needs a complete, makeover when it comes to the 2022 offseason in order to help them against the run. Now, this might seem a little controversial because my next player here is Justin Jones. Okay, Justin Jones, interior defensive lineman. I think Justin Jones was perhaps the only lineman in 2021 for the Chargers that really shined. Okay, Linval Joseph really looked good at times. He trickled off a little bit, but Justin Jones looked fantastic for the most part this year. Okay, when he was on the field, the run defense looked drastically improved. I think one of his better games was versus Pittsburgh, which I was there. They held, Najee Harris to a nice, little pocket of yards. He looked really good when he was on the field. And at 6'3", 309 pounds, he's the perfect, let's say, archetype of lineman for Staley's scheme. Okay, he would likely be running in the interior next to the nose tackle, defensive end in a 3-4 scheme. He fits that mold really, really well because his main job on this team should be stopping the run, which he does excel at. The one knock I have to give him is that he does struggle a little bit in pass rushing. Okay, but that's not really, that's not really what the Bolts need from him at the moment. So my verdict for Justin Jones is going to be to keep him, okay? Extend him. Make sure he gets a contract with the team and stays on that line. I think if we keep one piece on that line this year, it should be Justin Jones, okay? Because, again, he's the only piece that worked last year. He's only 25 years old. He still has time to improve even on what he's been doing, which, again, is a big deal. He's young. He's big. He fits the archetype. He fits the scheme. But I do think he'll need help from a few big signings this offseason. I think the Chargers need a nose tackle, and I think they need another interior or defensive lineman. And I think, guys, if the Chargers go out there and sign Akeem Hicks, who's heavily connected to the Chargers this season, if Akeem Hicks were to join Justin Jones, this run defense could dramatically improve in 2022. Dramatically. So I say keep Justin Jones. He likely costs around $7 million over 2 seasons. Keep that number in mind. And I think you add a guy like Akeem Hicks, that run defense dramatically improves in 2022. All right. Next up, let's talk a little bit about Uchenna Nwosu, our edge guy. He's been around for a long time with the Chargers, right? He's been a long-time project for the Bolts. And selected 48th overall in 2018. He's been here. He's been around a minute. And you know what? I'll say it. He's shown flashes of brilliance. He's looked really good over his course of time with the team. Versus Baltimore in the playoffs, he had a huge play on a Lamar Jackson that game. Versus Vegas, our last game of the season this year, he had a huge impact. He's proven to be a solid, but maybe not as consistent edge rusher in the NFL. Now, a big question is that enough for Los Angeles right now trying to make a Super Bowl? Is it enough for LA right now? Because, again, Bosa's been the victim of double and triple teams for some time now. He needs some help. The Bolts owe Joey Bosa some help opposite side on the line, right? Is Nwosu going to be that answer? I don't think so. I think we have a long enough of a sample of Uchenna Nwosu to just kind of say that the Chargers need somebody more impactful opposite Joey Bosa. And Nwosu slated to be a free agent this offseason, so what do? Here's my verdict. My verdict for Uchenna Nwosu is to extend him. I know, maybe a little bit shocking, right? We took a little bit of a turn here. Like, I don't know if he's the guy, but I do think we need to extend him, okay? And here's why. Nwosu has proven himself as a valuable piece of this team. He really has. I don't see him as an every down player for the Chargers, but I do see him as a highly valuable and an almost necessary depth piece for this team. Okay, the Chargers must sign a proven edge this offseason to help Joey Bosa, but Nwosu should stay on the team as a rotational piece or a solid backup should something happen to our starters. I think he fits the team very well. Again, those flashes, he can definitely contribute at times in the next season, but I don't know. I think, honestly, in my opinion, they should keep Uchenna Nwosu, and they should additionally go out there and pick up a big impact edge rusher as well. Because, again, Nwosu's 25 years old. He still has room to grow. Maybe we go out there and get a vet. Hey, I like that idea a lot. Let's go get a Khalil, or not a Khalil Mack, that would be a trade. Let's go get a Von Miller, right? Let's get a Von Miller on a short, 2-year contract and keep Uchenna Nwosu and rotate them in if they need to, because Von Miller's a little bit older. And then maybe that gives Uchenna Nwosu just a little bit more time to develop. I don't know. I think more than likely your contract is looking around 4 years, $22 million to keep him in LA. Maybe by the time, our veteran guy, leaves the team, Uchenna Nwosu is ready to step in for a couple of years as the starter. But who knows? My opinion is to keep Uchenna Nwosu, make sure you got solid depth at the edge rushing position, and make sure you got a guy that can rotate in there in case we do bring in a veteran opposite Joey Bosa. All right, next up. We're almost done here, dudes. Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelley, who you see here on the photo. Okay, the Chargers backup running backs. What do we do here? The Chargers have not really had a good backup running back or RB2 since Austin Eckler was back up to Melvin Gordon in 2019. The last good backup was the Chargers' now superstar running back on the team. Now, over the course of this season, we did see a flurry of games where various backups would compete for the running back 2 role. You guys remember there were some games where it was Joshua Kelley, some games where it was Larry Roundtree, and then I would say quite a few more games where it was Justin Jackson, trying to see if that running back 2 role was appropriate for these players. Jackson, in my opinion, by far looked the best, right? I think he always has. He just has a history with injury where he's not always available. And at times, Jackson was great. But also, in terms of his play, maybe a little bit inconsistent. As far as Joshua Kelley, he had a few solid plays this year, but once again, his turnovers got him benched. So what's my verdict for the Chargers backup running backs at this point? In my opinion, you got to cut him. Now, Justin Jackson's a free agent, so in this case, I would say don't re-sign Justin Jackson and cut Joshua Kelley. In my opinion, Kelley was an easy decision. I just don't think that was going to work out, him and the Los Angeles Chargers, after what we saw in 2020, and now with what we saw in 2021, I think it's time to move on. However, it does pain me not to extend Justin Jackson because he's done a lot of good stuff for this team. However, this team needs something different while Austin Eckler continues to shine as our running back 1, okay? Jackson, although he's good, doesn't complement Austin Eckler's role on the team very well. We need a bruiser. We need a big between-the-tackle kind of back. Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, Royce Freeman. These are cheap options that would give the Chargers a much-needed short yardage back to pair with Austin Eckler, okay? So you got to cut, Joshua Kelley and maybe not re-sign Justin Jackson, bring in a bruiser to help Austin Eckler. Cutting Kelley saves the Chargers $1 million for the cap, okay? And lastly, the last guy here, Mike Williams. We've talked so much about Mike Williams this offseason. My opinion keeps yo-yoing and going back and forth. But, in this particular video, let's go with this, man. The story of the offseason, Mike Williams. What do we do with Mike? Now, he was absolutely stellar early this season, right? He looked absolutely fantastic. He looked like the Chargers' featured wide receiver, but he started to trickle off at the end of the season, okay? Still, his role as the Chargers' ex-receiver seemed very prominent, and one that I think can continue to develop if the Chargers were to re-sign him. He's a huge part of this team. But to keep it simple, his price, his injury history, his inconsistencies, they maybe have opened the door for his potential departure on a contract year, okay? And again, you guys know a lot about this. We've talked a lot about this. Especially this season. A departure, especially in a season like 2020, an off-season like 2022, with free agents available like Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin, it complicates things a little bit, right? So I'll make it short and simple. My verdict for Mike Williams, 2022, what do we do with him? I'm going to say keep him, okay? And we would have to re-sign him in that case. There's the option for them to tag him. I'm going to say don't tag him. extend him. Give him a full contract, okay? Because again, this situation is complex because of his price. I think, you know, first and foremost, it is his price. You know, we could potentially sign Adams for just $3 or $4 million more per season. But when it really comes down to it, that's a big, big if. Would Adams even be available? We don't know. We don't know. And Williams, in my opinion, is just too valuable to the system to let walk at this time. A tag would cost the Chargers around $18 or $19 million a season. Don't tag him. Don't do that. Extend him. Maybe to a 3 or 4 year deal at around $6.5 million per season. I think that's pretty realistic. Get that price down if you can. If the Chargers, let's say, give him a 3 or 4 year contract and Williams is willing to take like $15 million, the more power to him, right? But there is one thing. I think in order to protect themselves, the Chargers should include an out in 2024, just in case things don't work out. They don't take a huge dead cap hit, as well as including incentives in his contract, because a lot of Chargers fans get nervous, right? Where a player has kind of like a breakout year and then you re-sign them and they kind of disappear. The way you fix that, the way you plan for that is including incentives. If Mike Williams hits X amount of yards, X amount of touchdowns in 2022, he gets a big portion of his contract. And I think incentives will be a big, big factor to put into play when talking about extending a Mike Williams, okay? This should protect the Bolts in the event that Mike Williams disappears again, okay? Longer video today, man. Again, these off-season videos, I just go off, okay? We talk a lot. We have a lot of opinions, a lot of ground to cover, but bottom line in this video today, if you guys remember that number at the top of the video, 58 million, what was it? $58.4 million. If you guys remember that number, after all said and done with this video, just with the players, the few amount of players that we featured in this video, the Chargers will have saved $15.5 million with the cuts that we included in this video, the cuts and the trades, right? And maybe inquiring like a second or third round pick if we decide to move on from K9 or even Jerry Tillery, okay? Putting their cap, $15.5 million in savings, this will put their cap at $74 million to start the season, which is huge. But after all the in-house extension like Mike Williams and Kyzir White are taken into account, the cap would be around $36 million, okay? That's bringing back Kyzir White, Mike Williams, you know, Uchenna Nwosu, all those big names are all coming back. We still have $36 million to work with. And that's only if we evenly distribute all the funds, like $16 million this year for Mike Williams, or let's say $8.3 million this year for Kyzir White, if we were to pay it out this season. The big thing about the Chargers, and the big thing I love about Tom Telesco, is that he's got a habit of backloading contracts, right? And the Chargers have a stupid amount of money, not just this year, but next year and maybe even the year after that. With Justin Herbert's contract coming up, though, they're going to be accounting for that, okay? So I would expect the cap more realistically to be anywhere between $42 and $47 million with Tom Telesco backloading a lot of these signings, okay? Which is a massive amount of capital to work with in signing big names in free agency this season, right? The Chargers could likely afford 3, maybe to 5 big names depending on how they structure their contracts this year, as well as enough cap left over to address depth, as well as the new draftees. Okay, this is a big, big year for Bolts fans and for the Chargers. We've got we've got the capital to work with, right? We got the money. We got the young talent. I think it's time to make a serious splash in 2022. We can easily bring everybody back and have a crap ton of money to work with in addressing all the holes this team might have. Well, guys, again, sorry for the longer videos. I get carried away. I love talking Chargers. If you stuck around this long, guys, and you're not subbed to the channel, please hit that like and sub button. We are definitely coming back with more off-season content as the weeks go on. We're getting close to the Pro Bowl, getting close to the Combine, free agencies around the corner, lots and lots of stuff to cover. And again, make sure if you guys do not have ExpressVPN, pick that up. Make sure you're ready for the playoffs and the Super Bowl. But I would say the biggest reason I keep ExpressVPN year-round is because, one, the deal is good for the year bundle, and 2, it gives me access to NFL Total Access, right? So I can keep an eye on what's going on in the Combine, in the draft, etc., etc. I'm a year-round football kind of guy, not just during the season. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. Hit us up with the like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty.